Here in the United States, Black history courses are being removed from school curricula. Schools are being mandated to stop teaching students about the truth of slavery, segregation, and racism in American history courses. Books about those topics are being banned in schools and public libraries. Museums, art centers, and other institutions whose budgets rely in any way on public funds are being prohibited from scheduling exhibitions and programs or from displaying materials promoting racial awareness or Black history. Much like the law that was put in place to regulate the punishment of the enslaved in Barbados, these policies are becoming a template for other governments as well as some private institutions. At the very least, they are slowly normalizing the erasure. They are slowly normalizing erasure.
All right, Shalom. I want to give all the praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai Bahasham Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth. Shalom to the hopeful elect. This article is from NBCnews.com. The headline reads, U.S. is one of 3 countries to vote against UN resolution calling slavery a crime against humanity. It says Argentina and Israel also voted against the resolution, which called for reparations. It says all 27 members of the European Union were among those that abstained. Okay, so are you surprised, right? What do you really expect from your enemies, all right? The same nations that enslaved you, you know? Jeremiah 15:5. For who shall have pity upon thee, O Jerusalem? Or who shall bemoan thee? Or who shall go aside to ask how thou doest, right? Let me read that in the NLT. Okay, who's really fighting for your plight? Okay, your circumstances here in America and across the world, right? It's not these nations. Jeremiah 15:5, NLT. Who will feel sorry for you, Jerusalem? Who will weep for you? Who will even bother to ask how you are, right? So again, you can't be surprised to hear this type of news, man. Okay? Remember, the slavery was world business, man. Okay? These nations don't want to give you reparations. They don't want you to be free. You know? Zechariah 11:5, whose possessors slay them. Who are the possessors? These Edomites. Okay? These nations. Okay? It says whose possessors slay them. Who's the them? The Israelites, you Jakes. Whose possessors slay them and hold themselves not guilty. See that? This is why they voted against it. Okay? They're letting you know that they don't give a shit about you, man. And hold themselves not guilty, and they say, and they that seldom say, blessed be the Lord, for I am rich, and their own shepherds pity them not. Right. So this is why, as we heard in the beginning, okay, they're trying to erase history, right? They're trying to change the narrative, all right? That's part of them holding themselves not guilty, right? Let's read on here. Okay, but we know according to prophecy that Esau and these nations are going to pay. It says United Nations, the UN General Assembly on Wednesday adopted a resolution declaring the trafficking of enslaved Africans, all right, which were not Africans, were Israelites, all right, but this is talking about us, that the trafficking of enslaved Israelites, the gravest crime against humanity, which it was, in calling for reparations as a concrete step towards remedying historical wrongs, right? Daniel chapter 9 and verse 11. And it reads, Yea, all Israel have transgressed thy law, even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore, the curse is poured upon us. What is that? Slavery. All right, going into captivity underneath all these nations, man. All right, being scattered, losing our identity, our true nationality. This happened. Therefore, the curse is poured upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of Yahweh Shem Yahushai, because we have sinned against him. Verse 12, the point. And he have confirmed his words which he spake against us and against our judges that judged us, by bringing upon us a great evil. For under the whole heaven have not been done as have been done upon Jerusalem. Okay, this is why I said that the trafficking of enslaved Israelites, the gravest crime against humanity. All right, this is true. All right, because this is what happened. All right, and Esau can't get away from that. All right, we fit the curses that are written in this book, man. Tell us when did this happen to the tiny tops? All right, where do they fit that? By bringing upon us a great evil, for under the whole heaven have not been done as have been done upon Jerusalem. All right, as it is written in the law of Moses, all this evil come upon us, yet we made not our prayer before the Lord our power, Yahweh Shem Yahushai, that we might turn from our iniquities and understand thy truth. See? Therefore have the Lord Yahweh Shem Yahushai watched upon the evil and brought it upon us. For the Lord Yahweh Shem Yahushai, our power, is righteous in all his works which he doeth, for we obey not his voice. So this is what happened to us, man. Okay, we broke the covenant, we disobeyed our father, he put us in slavery. Okay, that's part of the great evil that he brought upon us. Let me add one more. All right, tells you that in Baruch as well. Baruch, the 4th chapter. Okay, so this is Baruch chapter 4 and 10. For I saw the captivity of my sons and daughters, which the everlasting brought upon them. All right, this is all the doing of the Lord, man. Okay. Verse 14, it says, let them that dwell about Zion come, and remember ye the captivity of my sons and daughters, which the everlasting have brought upon them. Let's go back. So reading on here, it says, the resolution also urges, quote, the prompt and unhindered restitution of cultural items, including artworks, monuments, museum pieces, documents, and national archives, to their countries of origin without charge, right? And I had did a lesson going into that. Esau took the gold, the artifacts. Let me pull it up. Here we go, right here. It says, should Britain return Africa's stolen treasures? It says, Davina Morris examines the ongoing debate over Britain's acquisition of priceless African artifacts. And this is all Jake. All right. They took the gold, they took the artifacts, they took the resources, like it was saying here, right? You know, a restitution of cultural items, including artwork, monuments, museum pieces, documents, and national archives to their countries of origins without charge, right? I remember when the so-called queen died, and they were talking about how she stole like the gold and the precious stones and diamonds, you know, from these particular, you know, Jake nations, you know. So the scriptures say in Job how they swallow down riches, but they're going to cough them back up. Job 20 and 15. Job 20 and 15. He have swallowed down riches, and he shall vomit them up again. Yahweh Shem Yahushai shall cast them out of his belly. So all the riches and resources that he stole, he's going to cough it all back up. Everything that he took from Jake, he's going to give it back. All right, this is Sirach 10 and 8, or Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 8. It says, because of unrighteous dealings, injuries, and riches got by deceit, the kingdom is translated from one people to another, right? So we're in that transition, as I've been talking about. All right, but the point, he's going to give it all back. Okay, everything that he's stolen is going to come back to the original owners, right? So reading on here. It says the vote in the 193 member world body was 123 to 3, with 52 abstentions. Argentina, Israel, and the United States were the three members voting against the resolution. The United Kingdom and all 27 members of the European Union were among those that abstained. You see? While the United States opposes the past wrongdoing of the transatlantic slave trade and all other forms of slavery, which is bullshit, it says, quote, it does not recognize a legal right to reparations for historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time they occurred. Deputy U.S. Ambassador Dan Negria said before the vote. Right, that's the devil for you. That's the Edomites, man. All right, they won't take accountability. Zechariah 11:5 is reread. Whose possessors slay them and hold themselves not guilty. Esau is not going to hold himself guilty. All right, and that's the point. And that's okay because Yahweh Shemel Shai requires which is past, right? This is Psalm 73:5. They are not in trouble as other men, neither are they plagued like other men, right? Because he makes the rules. He makes the rules, he makes the laws, he can break them, he can bend them, he can do as he please. You know? Therefore pride compasseth them about as a chain, violence covereth them as a garment, right? He's the wicked and violent man. Their eyes stand out with fatness, they have more than a heart could wish. They are corrupt and speak wickedly concerning oppression. They speak loftily, right? And going back to the pride in this statement, man. All right? It says they do not recognize a legal right to reparations for historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time they occurred, all right? That's the fucking devil. So like I said earlier, are you surprised? What do you expect? You know? It says they set their mouth against the heavens and the tongue walking through the earth. The point, all right? It says, quote, the United States also strongly objects to the resolution's attempt to rank crimes against humanity in any type of hierarchy. He said, the assertion that some crimes against humanity are less severe than others objectively diminishes the suffering of countless victims and survivors of other atrocities throughout history. Right, but see, that's the devil again. All right, because they'll make you acknowledge, you know, what happened to, to the small hats and that bullshit. You know, remember 9/11 and all of that. But when it comes to what happened to you, all right, they say, hey, look, forget about it, right? You know, it's what do you say? It diminishes the suffering of countless victims and survivors of other atrocities throughout history, man. That's all bullshit, right? Because as I had brought this out before, let me pull it up, because I had went to like a similar type of topic here, right? It's 3 months ago. The enslavement of the 12 tribes was world business, right? So if you haven't checked this video out, check it out. You know what I'm saying? Because as I brought out, let me go to it. All right, just getting the numbers of what happened during the different slave trades, right? So you got the transatlantic slave trade, 1500s to 1888, captured 14 to 15 million, survived transport 10.7 to 12.5 million. All right, this does not include those who died in African wars, raids, marches to ports, those killed resisting capture. Conservative capture estimate 15 million. All right, you got over here on the right, transatlantic slave trade, African Americans, approximately 12.5 million Africans or Israelites were captured and shipped from Africa to the Americas between the 1500s and 1860s. About 10.7 million survived the Middle Passage to reach the Americas. Total estimate, 12.5 million people captured and enslaved. Right? Excuse me. It says the trans-Saharan slave trade, okay, Red Sea and Indian Ocean slave trades captured about 17 to 20 million Israelites, man. Okay, and like I said in the lesson, okay, slavery of the 12 tribes was world business. All of our enemies had their hand in the destruction, okay, of the Lord's people. All right, and this image that I showed in the video is how we were scattered. All right, going from the western interiors of Africa to all over the earth, the four corners of the world. Right, and I want to make a point on that. Right, you know, before we go on. All right, yeah, we went into all the tribes, the numbers, you know, over 220 million of our people enslaved, right? Hundreds of millions dying, you know, right? Indigenous slavery and forced labor in Latin America, all right? Death from labor systems, 8 to 15 million. Captured, enslaved, 10 to 20 million. Potosi alone killed millions. Conservative enslaved estimate, 12 million. Right, so this is dealing with the so-called blacks, Latino, Native Americans, and Hispanics. All right, so again, you can check that out in the lesson that I did. But anyway, right, I want to make that point. Because I was looking up the history, you know, pretty much on how we got into West Africa and all of that. And I want to read this, which I screenshotted here, right? So it says, this is the history how, you know, the house of Judah got into the western interiors of Africa, right? Matter of fact, let me read the scripture first. So let's go to Revelation chapter 12 and verse 14, and it reads, "And to the woman," and the woman represents Israel, "and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness." Okay, so after that Roman siege of 70 AD, all right, you had a lot of our people that fled into the western part of Africa. Okay, really all over the world, but for the focus, okay, the western interiors of Africa. That's what happened, right? That she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time, right? So once we were captured, if you will, right, and put into slavery by the so-called Europeans and brought to the Americas, you know, we were brought to the Americas to work and be slaves, all right, to build up America. Okay, that's the place where we were nourished for a time, right? It says, where she is nourished for a time, in times and half a time from the face of the serpent, all right, going into that 3.5 years, that 350 years, all right, when we were brought over to the Americas, going back to the 1600s, 1619, all right, to the time of Elijah coming back, all right, Elder High Priest Abba Bivens, okay, and the awakening of Israel, you know, pursuant to the prophecies, you know, that the truth would spring up. You see? Verse 15, it says, "The serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman," right? Going back to the Roman armies that were given the order to take down Jerusalem and to burn down the temple. It says that he might cause her to be carried away carried away of the flood, right? Because when that happened, you had a lot of Jakes that got put to death. You know, they were put in slavery under the Romans, all right, and carried away into captivity. You know, that's what happened. Verse 16, "And the earth helped the woman," right? Because Jake was able to, you know, to flee to different parts of the world. You know, like we were talking about the western interiors of Africa or whatnot. It says, "And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth." You see that? So Jake was able to get away. You know? But let's go back here, just reading the history, because this was on point. You know, going into how, you know, Judah, the house of Judah, got into the western interiors of Africa, right? So it says, "Medieval African maps written in the 17th century by the conquering Europeans. When Europe took over Africa, they outlined the territory for 2 kings, King Louis of France and King Joseph of Britain. These maps are called the Danville and Emmanuel Bowen maps of 1747. African map called Negroland, and the adjacent countries, also Upper Guinea, showing the principal European settlements in West Africa. In these maps, you will see the geographical locations of Hebrew cities and kingdoms that were later taken into slavery, right? Sources outside the Bible prove who the Hebrews are, right? Like the sign I showed you. Okay? This goes back to the 1700s. They had Hebos for sale, and then down the line they changed it to Negroes, right? As we're reading here, right? It says slave coasts were Hebrew names before Europeans renamed it. On the map, you will see Negroland above Guinea, so Yuda or Sudan, now called Sudan, sold the land of Uda, Judah, right? It says several African ships that came from a place called the Kingdom of Judah, Benin. Benin was where slaves were sold, called Adua. How you say it? Adua. I'm pronouncing it wrong. All right. Oda, which is French for Judah. This place is called a door of no return, right? And they were talking about the Negroland map, which I got here. All right, you can pull it up here. Okay. This is from the Library of Congress, right? So this is West Africa. Clearly you can see it's called what? Negroland. Right? Negroland. And these are all the kingdoms, all right, the Hebrew kingdoms. You know, you got the kingdom of Judah down here. Right? Let me see if I can bring it a little closer. Yep. Kingdom of Judah, or Wida, Slave Coast. And they called it the Gold Coast because this is where our people were being sold as slaves, man. All right, these nations made a lot of money, okay, for putting our people into captivity, right? You know, the areas of Ghana and Nigeria, all right? You see that? Right? New Guinea, all right? All those regions on the west coast of Africa, right? Here's another image just to show. Okay, Negroland, right? Can we zoom in? Right. So this is what you got here. Oh, let me go back. All these lands, all right, where Judah was scattered into. All right, the Gold Coast, the Slave Coast, where they took our people captive. Right? There's no getting around it. You see that? Let's read a little bit more. Number 5, the true name of the Slave Coast area was Judah, Wida, Kuda, or Abir. The kingdom of Judah, or Wida, can be clearly seen in the area named the Slave Coast, where the first Portuguese first set up their slave port in 1580. The Igbo tribe of Nigeria was called Igbo or Hebo by the French and Portuguese, which meant Hebrew, right? Which we showed you here, right? It's a corruption of the name Hebrew, which they changed to Negroes. This is why they call that area Negroland, because they knew that the tribes were over here. The so-called Europeans, these Edomites, the Spaniards, the French. Okay, they knew what tribes. They knew the Israelites had scattered into this part of Africa. Okay. 7, Northwestern University, Boston University, and LSU all have in their possession that the slave coast of Africa was called Judah before Europe got there. Number 8, in 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Hebrew Israelite state with great slaughter. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million black Hebrews were expelled and fled into Africa. See, as we read in Revelation 12, 14, 15. It says, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery, this is called the diaspora. Africa is where the Hebrews established colonies. The slave markets were full of black Hebrew slaves, right? Let's see if there's any more we want to read. Number 9, first century Roman Judean historian Titus Flavius Josephus admitted that millions of Jews fled into Africa after the fall of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. And this happened. This is true. It says, Ella Hughley's remarkable booklet, The Truth About the Black Biblical Hebrew, writes many of the Israelites who managed to escape their persecutors during the Roman Jewish War subsequently migrated to West Africa. 1,600 years later, their descendants were captured and brought to America in chains by cruel slave traders, right? So yeah, this is the history. All right? Dealing with so-called Negro land and how we had colonies and kingdoms in this region of the earth at that time before we were taken into captivity into the Americas, man. All right, which I have pointed out again in this lesson. Right? So check that out. Right? But anyway, let's finish this out. But that's pretty much the point, man. You know, Lamentations 4:21. Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwellest in the land of Uz. The cup also shall pass through unto thee. Thou shalt be drunken and make thyself naked. Right? The point, verse 22. The punishment of thy iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion. He will no more carry thee away into captivity. He will visit thine iniquity, O daughter of Edom. He will discover thy sins. You see that? So that's what's going on here. All the sins of Esau are being discovered. You know, they voted against reparations. They're trying to change the history. They're taking stuff out of history, removing books, as we heard early on. All right, so he's exposed. Right? So that's pretty much the point I wanted to add in on that. You know, Lord willing, this lesson was edifying to the hopeful elect. All right? Shalom.